My name is Naomi Elliott, also known as the Phoenix Priestess, founder of House of the Phoenix, True Self Project, and the Inner Realms Academy. I am a multi-dimensional creative, a transformational coach, and holistic wellness advocate. My mission is to bridge the realms of mental health and spirituality in recognizing the transformative and regenerative powers of our minds. Could psychosis be a cunning disguise for spiritual awakenings? I refer to myself as the Phoenix Priestess, with credence to my own transformative experience which led to my erroneous and traumatic detainment by the mental health service right here in the UK. With a dramatic increase of mental health breakdowns and spiritual crisis, especially since the pandemic, it's essential that we seek to expand our understanding of mental and spiritual health through the inclusion of transpersonal and holistic therapies. The mind is an incredibly complex. However, the problem that we face as humanity is whenever we don't understand something, we're more likely to pathologize it negatively rather than taking the time to learn more about the essence of what makes our mind so intriguing to study. From a traditional standpoint, spiritual encounters have been deemed old, superstitious, and folklore. But who really has the right to tell someone that what they are experiencing in that very moment is not actually real? The truth is only the individual knows what's being experienced within that moment. The truth is only the individual knows what's being experienced within that moment. As far as I'm aware, science cannot see the images or hear the voices or perceive the sensations of the things that we actually experience inside our very minds and our bodies. However, science can produce an impression. Yet it takes someone who's specialized in the world of the paranormal to interpret the balance between what is normal and abnormal. So I'd like to ask a question. What is a normal mind and what is an abnormal mind? Is there a bridge between mental health and spirituality that assists us in understanding our reality without classifying it as normal or abnormal? What are the measurements that we use to determine whether someone has a normal mind or an abnormal mind? In 2017, I went through a very intense spiritual awakening that only became traumatic when I was erroneously diagnosed with psychotic schizophrenia. This led to a high-risk level detainment where I won 2 tribunals in my favor. The question poses, how was this even able to happen in the first place? With no effective mental health assessment and lack of understanding to the context of the crisis that I was actually experiencing, this led to a sea of confusion that I'm still paying the price for today. What I was actually experiencing was a full transformation of my mind, body, and spirit. And my reality was preparing to go through the physical transition of becoming a mother. Being able to intuitively draw pictures of me giving birth 6 months prior to this experience, I set an intention of spiritual preparation to ensure that I could heal myself from the inside out, that when my baby was born, he could be born through a pure vessel. This meant me purging myself of my traumas, as well as my subconscious generational patterns that were all embedded in me on a cellular level. In the awareness of my healing journey, it activated some of the most in-depth spiritual encounters that I'm still, till this day, learning how to articulate. For a mental health professional that is not spiritually aware, comprehending the fact that someone is encountering a spiritual experience because they are aware that they are about to conceive a child could go in many ways. For me, it led to a high-level detainment that I wasn't even a threat for. What's interesting about my experience is that I was not wrong. The month after I was finally discharged from the hospital I conceived for the very first time my son Shiloh. So again, who has the right to tell me that I was wrong in what I was experiencing as psychosis? Exactly what I said was happening and about to happen, happened. After 2 years of fighting a battle which till today I am still fighting, the diagnosis I was originally given was downgraded to a condition called organic psychosis. Now, I am still awaiting an effective explanation to know exactly what an organic psychosis is, but to me, this again sounds like another attempt to pathologize someone who they just didn't quite understand. It's important to note that up until this point, my whole existence had been filled with nothing short of mind-blowing spiritual experiences. However, it's important to mention that psycho-spiritual encounters are not foreign to my heritage or culture. Being of Caribbean descent, I've witnessed both in charismatic Pentecostal churches and indigenous spiritual practices demonstrating tangibly the supernatural. It was normal for us to identify things that were happening beyond the veil through our 5 senses and beyond. Whilst having paranormal encounters was not foreign to my conscious and cultural awareness, it is foreign to traditional Western psychology. From witnessing expressions of ecstasy where it would look like someone had lost control, whilst being under the influence of what could be seen as an external or higher power. This is exactly the same thing that would happen in indigenous spiritual cultures, to where they would become an unapologetic expression of spiritual forces of nature. It is common for indigenous communities to come together and hold space for collective encounters with the spirit world. These are experiences that are ultimately transformational. Through trance-like dance, altered states of consciousness, the channeling of ancient languages, symbols, and messages, paranormality is their conscious normality. Whilst we live in a multicultural society, we miss taking time to absorb the colors of expression which stand outside what is considered the norm, and all from the perspective of Western acceptance. To label these traditions as superstition or old folklore is harmful practice. When these harmful approaches are adopted by doctors and nurses who are care providers and implicit bias towards a dominant culture, this essentially is racism. Prejudice led to the Holocaust. Prejudice led to slavery. Prejudice also led to the Trail of Tears. And prejudice still leads to the imprisonment of particularly those that are of ethnic minority descent every single day. In 2017, the number of Black and British people sectioned were just over 4 times higher from those from white backgrounds. Today, it's increased substantially to almost 4.5 times. Thankfully, we live in a time where the world of quantum physics presents the opportunity to expand our perspective of science, looking to see the world beyond what we've previously understood. With no previous exposure to the mental health system, it's confusing to me as to how I ended up becoming severely abused by a system that I believed was there to rehabilitate our mental health, as opposed to destroy it. However, for me being plunged in a mental hell, I feel I needed to see the reality of how badly the mental system needs a total reformation. Whilst the world is dominated by the perspective of biomedical psychiatry, there are people just like myself who are inherently disengaged from this approach to mental health. From the indigenous perspective of shamans and sangomas, it is normality and is celebrated when you are gifted to be able to tap into altered states of consciousness and reality. In Western psychology, this is considered psychotic, schizophrenia, bipolar, depression, anxiety, and these are all foreign terminologies to indigenous tribes. What they understand is a fraction of the spectrum of energy. Anxiety to a shaman will feel like your heart is trying to get your attention, to be aware of either the internal or external influences. It's a message from the soul to the mind. Depression is a message to let us know when our energy is too dense from having attachments to the past. Schizophrenia is an unapologetic expression of repressed aspects of the personality and ancestral memory within the bloodline. Bipolar is the full acceptance and expression of the emotional scale. For indigenous cultures, there is a meaning to every emotion, feeling, and sensation, but it takes the practicality and awareness of spirituality to understand the meaning of this experience on a personal level. How do you identify someone who's experiencing a mental health crisis? Are they experiencing a mental breakdown of their conscious reality? Or are they awakening to a multidimensional reality to which they have not learned how to effectively navigate? So here are some more questions. Can we be crazy or wise, or maybe a little bit of both? Is our brains broken when we go through a mental breakdown? Or is it an opportunity for us to be born again? Can psychotic symptoms be an indicator for shamanic gifts? Malidoma Somé, the late West African shaman, said that what we call depression, bipolar, psychosis, and schizophrenia might actually be a significant transformation in consciousness and a necessary stage on the path of human development. In the shamanic view of mental health, it's the signal for the birth of a healer. And so the crisis is in fact the beginning of a birthing and transformational process. What the West views as mental illness, the Dagara people regard as good news from the other world. This is because the newborn shaman is the bridge between the spiritual realm and the physical realm, being able to communicate messages back and forth. This is why the Western world needs to address their obsession around the pathology of things they may not necessarily understand. We are so conditioned to put people in a straitjacket that restricts their natural right of expression, rather than learning to understand the uniqueness within their multidimensional expression. Western society restricts the birth of today's healers and shamans. Whilst the initiation to this path is a diverse one, society seeks to throw them into detention centers and prisons, as opposed to refer them to people who have a deeper understanding of their experience. While some people may experience mental illness, some people experience transformational shamanic awakenings that activate them into their own purpose and life meaning. The Western world is not fit to deal with transpersonal and paranormal experiences. However, as the collective consciousness continues to shift and raise, this is no longer a reality that can be ignored by Western traditional psychology. A spiritual crisis is an intensely transformational experience that brings a multi-dimensional change to a person's belief system, sense of purpose, goals, attitudes, values, identity, and focus. More times, a spiritual crisis is a catalyst for encounters of deep mystical experiences that assist us in understanding the deep mysteries of our own life, as well as the life that surrounds us. Whilst it can be an incredibly daunting experience if there's no foundational spiritual awareness or access to spiritual guidance, with support, we can birth ourselves into new realities that we never before deemed possible. There is a very thin line between mental health and spirituality, as we experience all deep spiritual encounters such as out-of-the-body experiences or within the amygdala. This is the same part of the brain that we experience hallucinations, and so it can often be very difficult to discern which side of the spectrum that the brain is transmitting from. The current pandemic crisis calls for both an individual and collective consciousness shift that impacts people at different levels of their journey. Currently, traditional psychology does not have the effective foundations in place to deal with the very present mental health crisis that is ever growing. So what can we learn from this? Being someone who has experienced the transformation within a psychological and spiritual crisis, I implore us as a human race to begin to expand our awareness in the bridge between mental health and spiritual transformation. From transitioning our awareness from mental illness to mental wellness, we can begin to see the mind from a holistic and holistic perspective that seeks to empower people as opposed to destroy what we still have yet to understand. So is psychosis a cunning disguise for spiritual crisis? Absolutely. Thank you.